America's Cold War, Chapter 1: Demise of Free Security. The United States, wrote the historian Charles Beard in 1939, is a continental power separated from Europe by a wide ocean, which, despite all changes in warfare, is still a powerful asset of defense. Unlike the degraded nations of old Europe, America faced no threat to its security, Beard said, no prospect of conquest, and hence no need to go down the path of militarization and war. In 1917, Woodrow Wilson had defied this truth. He had taken the nation to war and expended American lives in treasure in a hopeless attempt to reform European power politics, to blast through, as Beard put it, the blood rust of 50 centuries. But the American people had wisely rejected Wilson's League of Nations after the war, having no reason to believe the United States should participate in the welter of European politics when its security was no more threatened in 1920 than it was in 1917. In Beard's formulation, the reality was self-evident. Intervention in the Great War was a mistake not to be repeated. For Beard, free security meant that the nation could avoid the miseries of militarism that beset the European powers. Without great effort, the American people could be spared from debt, confiscatory taxation, political repression, cultural demoralization, and slaughter of entire generations. All of the things that ravaged the warring societies of the Old World. Most acutely during the Great War of 1914 to 1918. With the nation now consolidated, the United States could cultivate a continental civilization, built not on cynicism and war, but on peace and prosperity. Why, if it enjoyed this absolute physical security, would the United States ever involve itself in great power intrigues or major wars? Beard offered two answers. First, it might happen if economic elites thought that they could benefit from American adventurism. Overseas military interventions made the economically powerful more so, he maintained, and these elites were sometimes able, such as in 1898 and 1917, to manipulate U.S. political leaders for their own purposes. Second, and no less objectionable to Beard, Americans might involve themselves in the affairs of other nations, if they believed, as did some liberal commentators, that the United States had an obligation to solve the world's problems. This, he thought, was naive at best, dangerous at the worst. Echoing what he saw as the wisdom of early leaders such as George Washington and John Quincy Adams, Beard regarded America's duty to the world as one of example. America's exceptionalism in rejecting power politics and easy war should be presented to the world as a model, an ideal to pursue. She goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy, as Adams famously put it in 1821. She is the well-wisher to the freedom and independence of all. She is the champion and vindicator only of her own. If U.S. leaders tried to force other states to adopt American institutions, Beard foresaw only trouble. Not only would the United States be pulled into destructive wars, it would also lose its own innocence. It would become the very thing it was trying to eliminate. American intervention in the First World War thus epitomized the folly of defying free security. Woodrow Wilson was guilty of violating this truth on both counts. By succumbing to economic interests and at the same time persuading himself that the United States was destined to save the world, he involved his nation in a war for no good purpose. Beard protested too much. Wilson was a subtler statesman than he perceived. The president believed the United States must enter the Great War, not out of some vague world-saving ideal, but because the spreading conflict revealed the bankruptcy of the European powers' political system. If the United States stayed out, the post-war order would continue to be dominated by European states, unable to give up their antiquated ideologies of realpolitik and colonialism, a sure recipe for further international conflict and Europe's eventual collapse. Even more ominous, should the European nations totally wipe one another out, and in 1917 that hardly seemed like an impossibility, radical movements, such as Vladimir Lenin's rising Bolshevik Party in Russia, could seize power throughout the Old World. Either way, the system of democratic capitalism that Wilson believed represented the most advanced form of political order faced a bleak future. In his view, the world's great powers should create a new kind of international politics: open, demilitarized, orderly. They should strive for freer trade among themselves, respect national self-determination, and abandon the defunct system of colonialism. Above all, they should form a League of Nations in which disputes and conflicts could be worked out through discussion and diplomacy. The transparent international arena that Wilson envisaged would allow nations to air their disputes and avoid the deep misperceptions and secret alliances that had triggered the Great War in the summer of 1914. Wilson's Bolshevik nightmare was not groundless. By late 1917, the party had seized power in Russia and was calling for a new world order based on a Marxist logic of proletarian liberation. Wow. For Lenin, the Great War signaled the impending end of capitalism and the beginning of a global revolution carried out by the workers that would sweep away the imperialist order. Wilson confided to his aide, Colonel Edward House, that he wanted to tell the Bolsheviks to go to hell. But he accepted House's agreement that he had to address Lenin's claim that there is little to distinguish the two warring sides one from another, and that socialism represented the future. But he accepted House's argument that he had to address Lenin's claim that there was little to distinguish the two warring sides from one another, and that socialism represented the future. Okay. The result was Wilson's famous 14 points: a moderate call for free trade, decolonization, demilitarization, and open diplomacy. As Beard suggested, this campaign was not altruistic, at least not in its original motivation. A new world order based on these principles would benefit the United States at old Europe's expense. But Wilson believed he could persuade the Europeans to see reason. "Follow me," he was telling his exhausted counterparts in London, Paris, and Rome, "or the Bolsheviks will prevail." Wilson's appeal did not impress Lenin. It called for an immediate end to the fighting, the eradication of colonialism, and self-determination for all peoples. But there were similarities in their messages. Both men rejected the old system of diplomacy that had created the conditions for the current war, and both insisted on the need for a new world order, no longer dominated by the discredited European powers. But while each professed adherence to democratic principles, they defined democracy quite differently. For Lenin, it meant workers seizing control of capital from its owners and establishing worker-led governments. For Wilson, it meant independent governments operating within capitalist systems and according to Republican political practices. In a sense, this divergence in vision set the scene for a Cold War to begin already in 1918. The reason it did not happen then was that old Europe was not quite dead. The great powers rejected Wilson's idealism at the 1919 Paris Peace Conference and rebuilt themselves, or tried to, as they were before, while the laboring masses of Europe ignored Lenin's call for revolution. With their respective demands to overhaul international relations refused. Both Bolshevik Russia and the United States retreated from the international stage. Faced with the resurgence of European power in the 20s and 30s, especially a revanchist Germany, that just means they want to reclaim their old states, the Bolshevik state, now named the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR or Soviet Union, turned inward. Its leaders, the ruthless Lenin, and beginning of the late 1920s, the even more ruthless Joseph Stalin, downplayed the goal of global revolution and worked to consolidate their hold on national power and to bring about rapid industrial development, the better to prepare the country for future war. The American public, disillusioned by Wilson's failure at the Paris peace talks, also shunned further involvement in European politics and dedicated itself to the reform of its domestic institutions, especially during the Great Depression of the 1930s. America, after all, still enjoyed the luxury of free security.